Okay, so in this next video, there's a couple of things that I want to cover. And they're very important, actually. I want to cover using props and costumes. I know it sounds like a very obvious thing. And while I'm talking about costumes too, I might get into a little bit of drapery and talk about folds and things like that, which is something that really gets looked over. But you'd be surprised at how much props and costumes get overlooked in character design. When designing your characters, more often than not, your characters are going to be very specific. You're designing them for a story, you're designing them for a movie, and they're characters that fit into a certain role. And those characters have backgrounds, they have personalities, they have all kinds of things about them that make them them. And so as a part of that, it's not just the look of a character, it's not just their face, it's not just their body type, but it's also how they dress, and it's some of the things that they use, the props. And there's so much that can that can be gotten across, that you can get across in just one image. And so anytime I have an opportunity, if I'm doing character designs, especially model sheets and that sort of thing, where I want to get across information about that character, then I'll use props and I'll use the right costume. The things I'm going to show you today are very, very obvious. They seem very obvious, but once again, you'll be surprised at how many times people kind of overlook adding these things in. I've done several images that I've kind of taken to finish. I've taken them through color, and once again, when you look at them, you're going to go, okay, well, that's obvious. But it's only obvious because you're seeing it now. Once again, if you take some of these props out and the costumes, if you don't make them specific, then you won't know who these people are. And so that's what I want to talk about. So why don't we go ahead, and I'm going to drag a couple of images over here. And I'll start with the first one. So I've got this woman right here, and there's several things about her that will tell you who she is. She's very stern looking, and she's got these books, and so this is a librarian. And so the way and she could be a school teacher too, but I imagined her as a librarian. And so to help get that idea across, there's several things that I did. I made her very conservative looking. So I gave her a very conservative outfit. I purposely made sure that there was no bright colors on her. I kind of went the stereotypical route of what a librarian might look like. You know, I gave her a very drab kind of form-fitting vest over a very conservative blouse, over a very conservative skirt. I have her hair in an updo that's done very conservatively. Everything about her is very conservative. And then I added those books in there to help get across the idea. The books are the prop to get across the idea that this woman is a librarian. And then from her, so just in this one image, you can get the sense that, okay, she's a librarian. I'm looking at her face. She's obviously not a lot of fun. There's a whole bunch of things you can insinuate just by looking at this one image. And that's what I want you guys to try to think about when you're creating your characters. You know, when you're creating a pose, what are the elements that you can add in there to add as much story to that pose as possible? Let's look at another one. So here's another guy, another one. So this guy, I've dealt with these guys before in the past, but right off the bat, you look at his costume. Okay, he's in overalls and they're covered in grease and gunk and dirt. He's got greasy hands, he's carrying a tire, he's got a wrench. Okay, he's a mechanic. But not just that, you know, I've ripped his sleeves off. I've made him really covered in dirt. He's overweight. He's got his hat turned on backwards. So he's, you know, maybe he's kind of this backwoods. He's gonna, you know, you're stuck out in the swamps and it's the only garage for miles and miles, and this is the guy that runs the garage, and he's going to get you for all you got. There's a whole bunch that you can insinuate just from this one image, and that's what I was trying to get across. That's what I had in my head. He's got a camouflage hat on, turned backwards. There's a lot of different little things. It's a very simple image, but once again, there's a whole lot that you can infer from this image, and you could kind of write a little story about this guy. You could insert him right into a story of your own, and it would just take off. Everybody knows these guys. He probably drinks a lot of beer. He goes out and he hunts squirrel. You know, these are guys that I grew up with, and so I drew him from firsthand knowledge. So, you know, once again, think about all the little details that will make your character real. Let's go ahead and look at another one. This one was kind of fun. I love to play music, and so I created this guy. I've spent some time in Mississippi, going through down through Clarksdale, Mississippi, at the crossroads, the birthplace of the blues out in the Delta. And I've seen a lot of these guys and spent some time in Chicago. And I've listened to these guys, and I've sat there and just really, really enjoyed it. And, something about the bluesmen of this area, that, they dress to the T, they play great music. A lot of times they're sitting down because they're older. All these things, all these experiences that I've had, I tried to pour into this drawing. I made sure that the guitar was authentic. That's another thing too I want to talk about. I'm going to bring this back up. In talking about props, I'm going to bring this over here. Even things as mundane as this wrench that this guy is holding. I went online and I pulled up wrenches. I Google imaged wrenches. I wanted to make sure that I was drawing it right. Or if you have a wrench in your garage, which I do, pull that wrench inside and draw it. Don't do what you think. Don't draw what you think. Because more often than not, you don't know that prop as well as you might think. And take the time. It's just a little bit of effort. Take that time to get in there and research that prop and draw it. Whether you have a character that's holding a gun or bow and arrow or is snow skiing, all those little props that I'm talking about, we all think we know what they look like, but chances are we really don't. A big one is a character riding a bicycle. I guarantee you, most of you, if you sat down to draw a bike, there's something about that bike that you won't get right. And so even now, I've been doing this for over 40 years, drawing and doing character design for over 25 years. And every single time I sit down to design a new character, I research the costume. Even this guy right here with the torn up overalls, I researched that. I pulled up mechanic outfits before I drew this to make sure I was drawing it right. I don't leave anything to chance because you want things to be authentic, because you want it to feel real. Even if it's a pushed cartoony character, start in reality, okay? And then you can caricature it. You can caricature the outfit, you can caricature the props. Caricature carries over into those things. It's not just about, faces and body types. And so, but once you know it, once you understand how that thing is in reality, then you can do whatever you want with it. It's the same with drawing animals that I was talking about on one of my other videos, where there's no difference between doing animal character design and human character design. It's just knowing your subject. And that goes all the way through costumes and props. Know your costumes. When I did this image right here, even though it's just a simple blouse and a simple outfit, I went online and I Google imaged conservative female outfits. And I pulled up what was there, and I got inspired by what I found, and then I kind of pulled from it, I simplified, and this is the outfit that I came up with. I didn't just make it up. Okay, and so it takes a little bit of time, but it's well worth it. It will make your imagery that much more authentic and believable. Let me pull over another one. Here's one. I wanted to do this young female chef. Maybe she's still in cooking school. And I did the same thing. Before I drew her in, I knew I wanted to do a chef. I knew I wanted to do this young woman. and she's testing out her favorite food, or she's making a soup. But I went online and I typed in chef's outfits, and I typed in aprons, and I typed in cooking pots, and I just wanted to make sure that I was doing everything authentic and making it right. And then I went in and I caricatured it, and then I pushed it and I pulled. All right, so it's very, very important to make sure that you, first of all, are using proper costumes and using props and really telling a story in your image. But then once you decide you're going to do that, then you need to get in there and just take a little bit of time and research those outfits and research those props and make sure that you're doing something right. Because the other thing too, if especially with Google Images and the ability to go on the internet, you might find props and versions of those props that you never would have thought of that might be a better thing to use, okay? Even something as simple as this. Here I did an image of a dog, and it's a very simple story, but when you look at this image, you can tell that this is a dog that he is very, very proud of himself. He's either gone out and fetched the stick and brought it back, or he wants to play. But you're at least getting the story from it. In this picture, I envisioned him as he's just brought the stick back and he's very proud of himself. The tail is wagging. So there's a whole bunch that you can infer by getting the right pose and using the right props. Okay? That's very, very important. Like I said, these seem very, very obvious, but it's very, very often that character designers will forget to use those things that are available to them and just focus on body types. And a lot of times they'll hit costumes, but then the costumes won't be researched, or they won't be very specific. You can get very specific with your costumes, and like I said, the whole idea is to get as much information into these images as you can to tell a story, to tell everything about the character. It's not just expression, it's not just pose. It's everything. It's the costume, it's the props, it's all of that. While we're on this, and while we're on costumes, let's talk about, very quickly, let's talk about drapery and folds, fabric, that sort of thing. This is another thing that very often gets kind of disregarded. Someone will draw some folds in and they won't think about it. They won't think about the quality of the fabric. They won't think about how those folds actually work. I mean, you can see on me, I've got tons of different kinds of folds. I've got, tension folds and bunching folds and all kinds of different things going on. I've got rolled up sleeves. I constantly am looking in the mirror. I look at myself. I want to see how these different folds work. I never, ever just haphazardly do it. I think about what's going on with that fabric. I think about the body underneath, and that's what you need to do in order to make convincing folds. And then you can also make those folds and that drapery, the way it falls, you can make it work for you to kind of guide the eye through the image and that sort of thing. So let's jump in here real quick and we'll talk about it. Let's talk about this one right off the bat. It's very simple, so I think it's a good one to start with. In drawing this, I wanted to keep things very, very simple and easy to get. And so I created a very simple pose, very simple silhouette, and there's several things going on. I kept the line of action through here very, very simple to lead right up into the expression. So I wanted that to be there. But in keeping those simple lines, big, long, straight lines, things that I wanted to, where I didn't want to break the silhouette a whole lot, there's little areas of interest. And I've talked about that on other videos where, you want simplicity and areas of interest. Well, that's something I did with these folds. But look at these folds. I made sure that because her arm is bent, it's going to be very tight along that part of her arm. So I kept this right here very, very simple, okay? But in here, obviously we know that fabric is going to bunch up. Well, the first thing is, I'm thinking that fabric is very light. It's lacy, you know, like she has up here. So in thinking about that, I wanted to give very small kind of delicate folds. And I thought about how those folds wrap around and are bunched up around the arm right here. Think about, you know, and I looked at my own arm and I looked at how these folds, how they overlap each other. Now, once again, look how there's a lot of complexity there, especially if I unroll my sleeve, how her sleeve is. If I unroll it, there's tension, it's tight there, and then there's a lot of overlapping folds right here. And that's what I wanted to do here in a very simplified way. So once again, remember I was saying you can look at reality and then caricature that. Get rid of the stuff you don't need and simplify, but still keep it based in reality. And that's what I did in this very simple version of the folds right there, okay? It's a very simple thing to do, but once again, people so often, in the rush to try to get something as mundane as a bent arm drawn, they won't think about things that really carry the look, like the folds of the fabric. You know, some people would kind of do this with the folds, and that's just not, it's not what they do. You want to follow the form of the arm that's underneath, and you want to make sure that you're drawing the fabric, the correct fabric. It's not burlap. I mean, if I had made those folds too big, it would feel like heavy fabric, and I didn't want that to feel that way. Let's look at another one. Let's look at this guy. Now here's one where I wanted it to feel like he's kind of popping out of his suit, out of his jumpsuit. And so I made everything really tight and kind of, you know, as if, you know, here, I want it to feel like his fat rolls underneath, like mine, were kind of being pressed through the fabric being bunched up in his armpits, you know? And so I pulled the fabric tight, I looked at it, and I wanted to feel like he's, like this outfit's maybe a size or two too small for him. And he's just really kind of, if he flexed, he'd end up ripping this thing. That's what I wanted it to feel like. So I wanted to make sure that the folds fit in there the right way. So think about that when you're drawing the folds, when you're creating fabric, and right down into his crotch, down into his, the way the pants are bunched up. You know, I was wearing long pants at the time, and I looked at how they bunched up around my ankles. The other thing too, looking at his work boots. I've got a pair of work boots upstairs. I grabbed those, I looked at them. I also pulled up a pair online, and I wanted to make sure, even though they're just simply drawn in there, I didn't let it go to just think, you know, me drawing what I think. I made sure that I was drawing it correctly because I wanted it to feel authentic. I wanted it to feel like he's a real mechanic from, you know, some backwoods garage somewhere. And then I want to talk about this one. This one's a little bit more involved. And but there's a lot you can do with folds, and I want to talk about this. One of the things about this image and leading the eye, I want to talk about leading the eye. Actually, before we do this one, let's go back to the chef. Where is she? She's right here. Let's talk about her too. And remember the librarian and how I had those lines that kind of led up to her head, because that's where I wanted the attention to go, on her face. I'm doing the same thing here. I purposely created this pose, and everything in it is kind of leading right to this. That's the important action. She's taking a sip. And so, with the exception of the stove and the cooking pot, if you look at this, all my leading lines head up here, right here. If it'll feed right into the neck, which goes right into the mouth. This line leads into here. This leads right into there. Even the spoon comes in. This arm leads right into here. Everything is going this way, this way, this way, this way. It's all leading right into there. make sure you're doing that in your leading lines. I know this is a little off subject, but I wanted to make sure that you're thinking about things like that when you're designing your characters. If we go back to the mechanic, I wanted you to look at his face. And if you look at this all goes, it goes right up, the arm, the shoulder, everything leads in this direction, bringing you right up to here, which is where I want you to look. Okay, so think about that when you're posing out your characters. Now, let's go back to the bluesman. Oh, no, actually, I want to go back to the chef again, because we're talking about fabric as well. And so once again here, I wanted to keep, because the reason I wanted to bring up these leading lines is I wanted to keep that simple. I wanted to keep a nice simple line right there. I want to keep this simple because I want your eye to follow it. And I wanted it to follow right into the spoon right here. And so there's certain areas that and because her arm is bent this way, it's going to be tight against the arm. And then here I had very simple fabric bends, but look at in here, right here, I made sure that I wanted this to all feel bunched up, but I didn't want to overdo it. And so I made sure that, once again, I'm looking at the fabric on my arm, and I wanted to play this area of complexity against this area of simplicity right here to make sure that everything kind of fits together in there. So look at the folds, look at your shirts, look at all the different aspects of your clothing, and just take a couple of minutes and then extrapolate from that, and then you can and simplify, and then you can add that to your character. Let's look at the bluesman real quick. So this guy, this one I really got into what I was talking about earlier with the chef, leading the eye, going through the composition, okay? Now this takes a lot of practice, but it's something that when you get it, it's really kind of cool. The bluesman in this image, he's playing music. And so I wanted there to be a sense of movement, but it's only one image. So how do I do that? How do I get the brain to feel like there's some movement in the imagery? Well, what I want to do is I want the eye to just kind of move through and just kind of flow through the image and just kind of never really stop and just kind of just flow through. And it'll give it a sense of movement. And so I purposely, with all the fabric and all the folds, I purposely created folds and line work that flowed into one another. So let me turn this on real quick. And so you'll see that all of a sudden, your eye naturally follows the roundness of this hat. It's going to come around. You see that, but that really leads into this feel. There's a strong line right there that comes down, but then that kind of flows into here and it flows out here. You also have lines that come down this way, that's a strong image there, but this kind of flows into here. And all of this it all kind of swirls. I've got all these, there's not a ton of straights in here. There's actually, other than the guitar, there's really no straights because I wanted this fluid kind of movement to the eye. And if you look, even in the guitar, if you look at these folds in the arm, see how they all kind of go this way, but then it feeds into this part of the guitar. Now that could feel like it swirls around the head, but also if you follow this line coming around the head, once again, I did this all on purpose. I put this guitar here for this reason. It comes down and it meets right into the curve of this guitar, which also kind of comes out and feeds into the curve of the belly of all those folds right there and flows. So all of a sudden you're starting to get, it's almost like a river of currents, it gets fluid and it starts moving, and all of a sudden it just kind of, even though it's a still image, it feels like he's moving. You get the psychological feel that he's moving. So here's some arrows that I did over the top for you to get a sense of what it might look like. And if I turn this off, you can see it looks like all these, currents and eddies and swirls and all that kind of stuff. But if I turn him on and you look at what's underneath there, now all of a sudden you can look at it with different eyes. You can see how everything kind of flows one into the other. I didn't want hard edges going against each other. I wanted these dominant lines of action to kind of flow into one another and never stop. So there's a lot you can do with folds and fabric. So keeping all the eye movement in mind, I also went in to make sure that I was hitting all of these folds and creases correctly. Down in his crotch, it's going to be tight, and it's going to, the fabric will bunch up originating from that area. I wanted him to feel like he's a little bit thin underneath so that his pants were a little bit baggy. I made sure that I looked at men sitting down with dress pants on, and that those folds, they folded, they bunched up the right way. If you wear, for you men that are watching this, the sports jacket or the blazer, tends to be thick and heavy. It doesn't really bend up on the shoulder, but when you get into the arm, it bunches up very, very easily. And so that's what I tried to indicate here, having worn a jacket myself and also looking at reference. So make sure that when you sit down and you're drawing your costumes, which is very important, make sure you're researching every aspect of it, including something as simple as drawing folds. Because you can get eye movement through drawing your folds the right way, but you also can get a sense of how heavy the fabric is. There's so much you can do. If he was wearing a parka, a big heavy jacket, that obviously would fold differently than what he's got here. So make sure that you're doing all of your research. You're getting the right costumes that are going to tell the story. And you're using the right props that will tell the story. So all of those things in combination with the right pose will get so much information that your viewer can look at your character on the sheet, and all of a sudden they can tell a whole story about that character that they're looking at. Okay? So why don't we go ahead and move on to the next video.